So plenty of ground to cover when it comes to migration. For more on the UN's Global Compact for Migration and the latest migration issues in the US, I'm joined by Remi Piet, Director at America's Market Intelligence. So, Remi, let's start with your reaction to the UN summit outcome. What are the biggest takeaways?
Well, the biggest takeaway is that for once we had actually a gathering of almost every country trying to find common solution and discuss best practices in terms of migration, because what we've discovered over the last 5 to 10 years is that most countries were not able to tackle issues such as Syrian refugees or migration from Venezuela or migration from Africa. There was no clear indication of what would be the best practices in terms of being able to collect data, fight against smugglers, being able to analyze the situation and take a decision about the whereabouts of those migrants. So here it was an interesting effort from the international community on how to deal with an issue which is way above issues of state apparatus, but has to be tackled on a comprehensive basis with intergovernmental approach.
So in terms of solutions, distributing funding, support on the ground, what were some of the main things discussed?
Well, the main things discussed were to try to understand the reasons for immigration, but also more than anything, what are the channels, what are the processes. I mean, let's be clear what it's not. That gathering of countries is not a binding agreement that will enforce laws from the supranational entities over countries. From the very first paragraph, it says that this is a non-binding document. This is an agreement on which, on the best practices, on the way to actually tackle immigration, but each country remains the sole decision makers of how they want to manage their borders. However, it is very important to collect those data, to understand the evolution of practices, to fight against organized crimes and human trafficking that has been so much costly in terms of human lives, but also are really fueling drug trafficking and trafficking in different countries. So the issue is to really kind of understand what are the dynamism of migrations in the world today, and try to find a clear discussion and joint conversation over how to best approach those issues and be able to tackle when they happen. Especially important when we're going to see a rise of immigration over the next decades, following climate change, following deep issues of increasing inequalities between continents.
So then, given what's at stake then, how much real-world impact can the deal have for migrants around the world if it is in fact a non-binding agreement?
Well, that's the criticism that we have from far-right movement, is that this is an agreement that, showed the way and kind of influences countries. But in truth, because it's a non-binding agreement, you can have the same kind of criticism about the fact that it has no real implementation and no real value in the international community. But that's the reason of the United Nations. The United Nations actually tries to work on a series of different issues, whether you're looking at poverty, you're looking at climate change, you're looking at, migration, and try to suggest best practices or the right way to approach comprehensively those issues. It is kind of a roadmap that countries are free to follow or not to follow, but obviously gathering so many experts and so many views from different countries, it is a clear kind of teaching of how best to approach those issues.
So paint a picture for us. How would you describe the current state and the pace of global migration patterns?
Well, we've seen rise of global migration following different, key development of crises, whether you're looking at the Syrian civil war or you're looking at the Venezuela economic collapse, which has led to, hundreds of thousands of people and millions of people moving away from their home country towards other continents. You also have, kind of a less structural migration for economic reasons, and this will only worsen and increase in terms of numbers simply because those basic issues that lead to migration, inequalities, conflicts, climate change, and potential reasons for leading to more and more refugees are not tackled at their roots. And therefore, because those issues are not tackled, there's migration that are seen as sporadic or seen as limited in terms of their numbers will actually be common issues in the coming decades.
Now, one of the arguments that we hear is usually a lot of these rumors about how much migrants are burdening local healthcare and social welfare systems. But what do we know about the recent findings on the overall economic impact when it comes to accepting migrants?
Well, it depends if you're actually looking at these issues from the economic perspective or the identity perspective. And from the identity perspective, you do have some claims, especially from the far-right movement, saying that migration is actually, diluting the values of one country. And then it's actually a question of how you operate, issues of integration and developing a social contract between, non-migrants and migrants inside the country. And on the economic level, the issues of the stress on social infrastructure, hospitals, and so on, is is real when you're actually looking at, welcoming migrants over the first couple of months. That's why, for example, this Market Pact, the understanding of those migration would be very interesting to try to be able to see the way that it has on different infrastructure and different, systems and social systems. In the long run, in terms of economics, I mean, almost every study show that, migration is actually much more negative on countries losing its global fourth and the youngest, fittest people that are able to go to another country than it is for welcoming countries, because migration has always been, when you look over the last few centuries, a powerful force towards more economic development, feeding also a series of pension plans and welfare state that we have in Western countries. Without immigrants, we will not be able to finance these, basically.
And very quickly, Remi, obviously we saw that heated debate with US President Donald Trump about this funding for the war with Mexico, the potential use of military funds, and even a proposed government shutdown as leverage when it comes to the so-called migrant caravan and the problems at the southern border. Just quickly, what do we know about where things stand?
Well, what we're looking at here is that all those positions, whether you're looking at the Trump administration or you're looking at other, head of states that actually didn't go to Marrakesh, whether you're looking at Dominican Republic, Chile, some Eastern European countries, they actually are in a situation of using migration as a political discourse and populistic discourse to potentially win future elections inside their own country. The issue here is that whether you have head of states that comprehensively and responsibly look at issues and try to work together towards a concerted solution, or actually just try to use migration as a good political issue on which they can bang to win, short-term elections for their own interests.
All right, thank you so much. Remi Piet there, Director of America's Market Intelligence.